Hello Stitchy friends, it's Shari. Today I'm creating a fun butterfly suncatcher project using Poshta Design basic butterfly die and the Monarch butterfly details. So there are my pieces cut out, but I wanted to talk to you about the butterfly die. This is the basic butterfly and it comes with all of the solid wings to create the basic butterfly. So this is what you get when you cut those solid wings. Now I cut these out of paper so you can see them a little easier. That's going to cut a solid piece of a wing that you would just layer on to the base piece. Then if you want to use the details die, this one will cut the interior pieces. So you can see there is no cutting line, there are no stitching holes, so you need to cut the solid one first. Then you will take the details die and line it up just like this. Run it through a second time, and this is what you get. You'll get those interior pieces cut out so you kind of have this overlay. So cut the solid, then use the details. Now if we were doing solid felt, I would cut a color out of the solid and a different color out of the details and layer them together onto the body of the butterfly. But I'm doing something a little different today. So here are all my pieces. I've cut 2 of each wing. I've used the solid piece and then the details die just as I showed before, and I've cut everything from inkwell felt. I've also cut the bodies too, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now because I wanted to create a really cool sun catcher kind of effect, I'm using vellum today so that the light will shine through my solid piece that goes in the center. I've cut this piece down to 4 pieces so that I can play with it a little bit, and I'm using my alcohol inks today. I haven't used these in a while, so this was a really fun project to kind of pull these out and play again. And I pulled out my white glass mat so that we can see those colors a little bit better. So I'm starting with my first piece here, and I'm using some of the blending solution. Now this is clear, so you may not see it very well. And then this will allow me to add that alcohol ink on, and it will move around with that blending solution. I am going to do a warm colored butterfly today and a cool colored butterfly. So this one is going to be mostly yellows and oranges with a little bit of red. And I'm using my little puffer tool there to blow some air and move that ink around while it's still able to move around. Then I'm adding in some more colors on my nice yellow base. So there's some pretty oranges, and I'll just move that around with the air as well. And all I really want to make sure I do is that I cover this enough to where I can cut that solid butterfly and have color all the way to each edge. Now I'm adding in a little bit of red. And then I'll probably just let this sit there and dry. I do go back to it and add a little bit more red in later, but you can see I've covered it enough to where my butterfly is going to die cut out of this and there'll be no uncolored vellum left. Now I'm working on a green teal panel, so I'm adding my blending solution again. Then I will add some green and some teal colors to this one. So I created 2 butterflies today, but you could create a lot of these because it was a really fun to create these backgrounds with my alcohol inks. So I'm adding in a different color. That blending solution still allows me to move that color around with that puffer. And I just want to make sure that butterfly fits. So I think a little bit more, especially down towards the bottom, you just want to make sure that it all will die cut out of that piece of vellum. I do like adding in the darker tones with the lighter tones. And once you let this dry, you can always go back and add a little bit more if you feel like you need to. So here I went back and I'm adding in some more red. I just added a little bit more of that blending solution and some more red color. You can see I had kind of some harsh reds here, so I'm just going to add some solution and make some more shapes with that color. And I did the same on this one with some really dark spots. This just allows the color to move around some more. And then you want to set these aside till they're completely dry and not tacky anymore. They are going to be shiny on one side where we added the ink, so it's kind of hard to tell if they're dry just by their shininess. You just want to let them sit and make sure they're no longer tacky. So I let these sit and I'm ready to do some die cutting. Now I am going to place my die on the side that is not shiny. And I'm also going to use a piece of typing paper between the tacky side and my cutting mat. So I have typing paper, vellum with the shiny side down, and then my die. And this is what we get. And then I can pull off that typing paper, just kind of moving it around to break the two apart. And you're going to see why I did this. There are a few little tacky places, and I want that to stick to this paper that I'm going to throw away and not stick to my cutting mat. So let me do the exact same thing to the green one here. And then I'll just pull off that typing paper, and you can see it kept that little bit of ink that's still going to stick on the typing paper and not my cutting mat. Now there are a couple options for these layers of the butterfly. We have a shiny side and we have a matte side depending on where the ink was. So what I like is the matte side out. You might like the shiny side out. That's just a personal preference. It would look like this, but I like the matte side showing through my felt. So what I'm going to do is layer some pieces of vellum together, shiny sides together. So I have two pieces that I've inked here. This is going to give it kind of like a kaleidoscope effect because both sides are not the same. You could also just take a plain piece of vellum and layer that on the back side so that there's not a shiny side on the back either. This will also give you a little more sturdiness because we're using two pieces of vellum versus one. So I'm going to start with my warm colored butterfly here. So again, I have two pieces of vellum with the alcohol ink. I'm putting shiny sides together. And to hold them together, I'm actually going to add just a tiny, tiny bit of adhesive runner right on the body, right in the center. This will just hold my two pieces together so that they don't shift around too much. And you're never going to see this because that will be covered up with the body of the butterfly. So I'm just making sure they're lined up perfectly, those holes all align, and I'll just hold those pieces together right in the center. Now I am making sure that I am using plenty of floss for this. So I'm splitting this, so I'm using 3 strands, but I want to go around each wing without having to add more floss. And remember, this is paper, so we need to be very clever on how we hide our knots. So I'm going to come up in one of those holes of the body because we're going to hide all our knots underneath the body of the butterfly on the back side. Then I came through the felt. So I'm basically traveling over from the body to the wing, and it goes under the felt and then out the front. Then I can start my stitching. I'm going to do a running stitch around this wing. So let me grab the back side, make sure it's in the right hole, and I'll layer these together. So just to review, we have felt on the back, 2 layers of vellum with shiny sides together, and felt on the front. And I'm actually going to grab a clip to kind of hold these pieces aligned while I get my stitching started. These are very delicate pieces with those interior pieces cut out, so be very careful with them. You could also do this project out of cardstock if you wanted. I just like the dimension that the felt gives to the project because it's thicker. So I'm just doing a running stitch around the whole wing. And then when I get back to the point where I started, which I'm skipping ahead here, so I'm back to the side over there and against the body, this is where I started. I'm going to go back in the other direction with the running stitch, filling in all of those missing stitches to where I have a stitch all the way around the wing. And I know this is hard to see with black floss on black felt, but I did want that really stained glass look with the colors in the center and that dark frame around. So I'm just going back in the other direction with that running stitch, and I will fill it in till I get back to where I started, and then we're going to tie it off. So I'm skipping ahead to my last little stitch here, and you want to come out underneath the felt. So this floss is under the felt and on top of the vellum. Then we're going to tie our knot, And again, I started this in the body, so you're going to see that that knot is kind of right in the center where the body of the butterfly will cover it up eventually. Then I can trim off my ends. So you can see I have those little ends there, but we're going to cover those up in the end. And that front piece will get covered up as well, just like that. That body is going to cover up all those little bits. So I need to do the same to the other 3 parts of the wings. And I'm starting the big wing on the right side the same way I started the one on the left, coming up through the body. There's the tail that's on the back side. Then I went up underneath the felt with my first stitch, and I'll just do the running stitch around and then back and tie it off in the exact same way I did the first one. Now I did want to show you for the 2 small wings at the bottom, I did not tie it off and trim it. I am tying it just like I did before, but I'm not going to trim it, so I'm going to have one less pair of tails to have to try and hide. I can just travel across the backside and start the next wing. And when I get done with this one, I'll tie it off just like the others. And like I have said, all that will get hidden when we finish it up by sewing the body on through the center. So now I am finishing off same way, coming out underneath the felt, so it's between the felt and the vellum, and then tying it off. And you can see when now we have this big mess of knots right here, which would be unfortunate if we hadn't put the body on there that's going to cover it all up. So for the body of the butterfly, I've actually cut 2 out of black and 1 out of soapstone because I wanted a little bit of contrast, and I also want to stack 2 of them on the front so that it has a little more dimension and thickness. And I'm just making sure all my little holes are poked out before I start this. I also have the little antenna there, and I'm going to show you how I added that to the head of the butterfly. So I am pulling back the vellum. Remember, I have 2 pieces. I put a little bit of adhesive between the 2 pieces of vellum. Then I'm folding my antenna in half, and I will sandwich it between the 2 pieces of vellum in that adhesive. And that's going to hold it in place while I stitch. Now, the fold between those 2 is in that below that second hole, so it's at the bottom of the head. And I'm actually going to start somewhere down here in the middle of the body so that my knot is not up at the end, not at the head and not at the tail. So I counted down about 5 holes. Now the tail is coming out between the vellum and the felt on the back side. This is all on the back side. You're going to kind of tell the back from the front here when I start to flip it over. And when I layer this more gray layer over the body, you'll see this is the front. And we want to make sure we start in the correct hole so that everything lines up. Now, as I work my way up the head, which is just about 3 stitches here, it's going to really lock in those antennae because the fold where I folded them in half is down below the second hole. So this is going to go between them and really hold them in place. The adhesive just kind of held them in place so they didn't move around while I was doing my stitching. So I've done that running stitch up to the top of the head, then I'm coming back, and of course I will bypass where I started and go all the way down to the tail and then back up to where I started. So I'm just speeding this up a little bit so you can see the process going down to the tip of the tail. And you can see now how those stitches are getting filled in because I am using black floss on that more gray soapstone felt. Now to finish it off, and I know this is hard to see, I'm on the back side, and I'm coming out between the felt and the vellum again. So when I tie this knot, it's going to get hidden underneath the felt of the body on the back side. Then what I'm going to do is take my needle, go underneath the body and kind of out the bottom down here. You want to avoid the wings because in this case we have wings where you're going to see everything because it's vellum. Now if they were felt, you could bury your thread anywhere inside this butterfly. But since we're using the vellum, we want to make sure all those tails are hidden underneath that center portion. So I'm just doing it with the other tail. I'll trim it right at the edge. And then if there's any of those tails earlier that I'm trying to hide that might be sticking out, you can just trim them off as well, or just make sure they're tucked inside. And everything's on the back too, so if one starts to peek out, it's not that big of a deal. Then the last step is having something to hang it with, and I am using some clear thread, and this is going to be very easily thread through the head of the butterfly. You don't really need to worry about putting this in beforehand because you can just thread this between the felt and the vellum very easily, and I'm doing it kind of down a couple stitches so it will be held by those stitches that are in the head. I'll just pull it through, remove my needle. I know this is really hard to see. You can kind of see it in the light there. And then I'm tying a knot with the two together. And I have plenty of length here because I don't want to have to struggle to tie that knot, and then I can trim off the excess. And now we have a little sun catcher that can hang. Here's the green one I made as well. All the same steps, nothing different at all. But I thought I would show you what it looks like when you hold them up to the light. So I grabbed a little flashlight and I'm showing you here that it looks really pretty when the light shines through. I did take some pictures out in the sun that I am going to share as well, but I just wanted to really show you that cool transparent look that they have. So here are some pictures I took outside with the sun shining through, and I just think that these are so fun. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you like this kind of unique idea on a way to use the basic butterfly and the monarch butterfly details. Thank you so much for watching and happy stitching. Bye!